And I'm going to go from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. We are joined with Dimitri Lascaris, the man himself. How you doing, Dimitri? You doing okay today?
I'm doing fine, Jamal. How you doing? You look great.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Dimitri Lascaris, he's lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Dimitri ran for leadership of the Green Party in 2020. He is host of Reason to Resist. Check him out on YouTube. Dimitri, I'm glad that you could join me, man. Always appreciate these conversations.
Me too.
So Turkey has issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Not to mention Netanyahu's a list of criminals in Israel that they effectively issued an arrest warrant for. And I looked at that and I was like, but you guys helped overthrow Syria. Like it's the hypocrisy of it that gets me. Give me a take on this. Is this purely for domestic consumption? Is there some other reality that I'm completely missing on this?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there is some seriousness to it. There's definitely some, shall we say, grandstanding and showboating going on.
Right.
I mean, you highlighted, what Turkey has done in Syria, which was very much to the advantage of Israel's genocidal regime, namely overthrowing a government or helping to overthrow a government that was hostile to Israel and friendly to Hezbollah and Iran. That was a big, change in the region, which Turkey very much helped to bring about. But there's other things that are going on. Turkey, also was reputed to be one of the three countries that put intense pressure on the resistance in Gaza, the others being Qatar and Egypt, to accept this joke of a ceasefire, which Israel has violated every single day. And they were supposed to be the guarantors of this ceasefire. They've guaranteed nothing. Not only has Israel killed Palestinian civilians on every single day of the ceasefire since October 11th, an average, by the way, of about 8 persons per day killed and about 15 wounded. But in addition, it's only let in less than 30% of the humanitarian aid to a starving population. What has Turkey done about this? This would be much more useful to actually do something to force Israel to comply with the ceasefire than these arrest warrants. Now, having said that, first of all, they're setting a precedent amongst NATO states, issuing arrest warrants, domestic arrest warrants for not just Netanyahu, but also the current defense minister, Israel Katz. The total number of persons is 37. I understand they haven't published the whole list, but the ones who are there also Ben-Gvir. So that adds public pressure onto other countries that are supposedly committed to the rule of law. Also, if they submit these arrest warrants to Interpol, Interpol is usually obliged to issue what is called a red notice, and that obliges other states, although they have to, ultimately whether or not they will arrest these people in compliance with the red notice is a matter of their own domestic laws, which they may or may not enforce and apply. But in theory, other states, which would include, European states, the United States, Canada, would be obliged to arrest these people pending extradition. If indeed there is a way to get them extradited from the arresting country to Turkey. And by the way, Turkey does have an extradition treaty with the United States. It does have extradition treaties with EU countries, but EU countries typically do not extradite to Turkey, citing, political motivations for the arrest warrant. So in any case, this does apply pressure. It does actually have some legal significance. But I have to tell you, quite apart from all of the reasons we have to be skeptical about Erdogan's motivations, Jamal, at the same time as he did this, and he could have done this a long time ago, there's this big discussion taking place about whether or not Turkey will be part of this multinational force in Gaza. Right. And I think already Israel was very uncomfortable with that, was pushing back that Turkey would be part of that. You could pretty much drive the nail into the coffin of the idea that, Turkey is going to participate in a multinational force now. And so I have no proof to back this up, but I'm a little bit suspicious that Turkey did this at this particular moment to kill any suggestion that it would be taking part.
Oh, I see your point. Israel's going to scream bloody murder. We don't want the Turks to be part of this force.
It's entirely predictable that Israel would put its foot down at this stage, say there's absolutely no way in hell we're going to allow the Turks in Gaza, right? So was that the motivation or part of it? I don't know. It's possible.
Oh, that's super interesting. I didn't even think of that. That's super interesting. I mean, will there ultimately be a multinational force in Gaza? I mean, from my understanding, none of the states wanted to be involved in this, even though
Yes,
all of them signed up for it, weirdly enough.
there's the practical question of whether they can put together a force that will be willing to go in there. Let's just park that for a second. And then there's the question of the legality of it. There is no legal basis for the infusion of foreign forces into the Gaza Strip at this time. This is occupied Palestinian territory. The International Court of Justice ruled last year that the occupation of Gaza is ongoing and is illegal and must end forthwith. And simply to replace, troops approved by Israel from other countries with the current occupying force, I think would be a blatant violation of international law. Now, if it's approved by the UN Security Council, then there would be a legal basis potentially for this to be done. And I understand that there is a plan that's going to be put to the UN Security Council. And the question is going to be whether China and Russia are going to tolerate this. And if they do, the Palestinians are objecting vociferously, not just Hamas, all of the resistance groups, with the possible exception of Fatah, which is not really a resistance group, the party of Hamas. Although I think the armed wing of Fatah is objecting, but Mahmoud Abbas himself, of course, is not going to put a stop to this. So they're saying no. Are China and Russia going to allow the UN Security Council to overrule the Palestinian people? I hope not, but it's possible.
Okay, I am well beyond this idea that there's a such thing as international law. I don't think it exists. So there's that. As for China and Russia, give me your thoughts on that. I mean, from my point of view, China. I had this conversation with someone in the region, and there is a persistent tension on this channel. You've seen some of it, just with Carl Shah. I'm sorry, with KJ No.
Right.
And the persistent friction has to do with different, let's say, wings or different interests. So you have people who cover China, you have people who cover the Middle East, you have people who cover Russia, you have people who are kind of in between all of these items. You have people who cover domestic. People from the Middle East have a strong sense that they've been abandoned, that Russia and China have, for the most part, effed them over, in a sense. And that this idea of Russia being part of the resistance was never really a real thing. And I mean, they can go hardcore with this and some of their points of view on this. I disagree with those points of view. I get where they're coming from and I understand where they're coming from, but I don't entirely agree with all the points of view that they take on this. But some of them go very hard on this. From my point of view, people have this belief that BRICS, that Russia and China, because they consider themselves anti-imperialists in the way that they operate, that they would behave differently in the world and that they would take, let's say, stronger positions on issues like Gaza or stronger positions on issues that come up where you're getting the West overplaying their hand. And they rarely do. And so it's like, from my point of view, these are realist governments. And as realist governments, they do what's in their interests. Give me your take on this. I mean, where do you think they're going to fall in this in regards to the UN Security Council?
Well, let's start by talking about their general posture, their general approach to international relations. I think they are anti-imperialist when it comes to their own sovereignty.
Yes, agreed.
We will not be dominated by you or any other foreign power. They are clearly, Russia and China, passionately committed to that principle, and they're willing to go to war to defend their own sovereignty, even against the entirety of NATO, as we've seen. Yes. Now, when it comes to defending the sovereignty of others against Western imperialism, they have a very mixed record. It's just, what did they do to defend the sovereignty of Syria? And Russia was in a very good position to do that because it had military bases in Syria and knew the place well. And yet, although it did defend the internationally recognized government of Assad, whatever you may have thought of Bashar al-Assad, he was the internationally recognized leader of Syria. And so they did initially defend the internationally recognized government of Syria, but ultimately they acceded to his overthrow, the Russians. And although they gave him asylum in some form in the Russian Federation, they're now openly embracing this head chopper al-Jilani as the legitimate president of Syria, which is really quite appalling, frankly. China, I think it's interesting to compare China and Russia to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union actively exported revolution, that was supported by socialist and Marxist movements in countries around the world. And it went to the point of even arming them, providing them intelligence, providing them with very substantial economic support, as it did to Cuba in its efforts to fight against US imperialism. But Russia has not followed in that tradition. I think in many ways, I saw an interesting article recently about how Russia today continues to benefit from that tradition in its relations with the global South.
Yes.
A lot of people remember fondly, how the Soviet Union actively intervened to defend the sovereignty of states in the global South for decades. But that's just not Russia's gig nowadays. And in a way, you can kind of understand it because Russia is not
the Soviet Union.
It's as formidable as the Soviet Union.
Right.
And so it has a much smaller population. It had to overcome the crisis of the 1990s. It took a lot of time for that to happen. It has been consistently targeted by the West. So I don't want to sound too critical of the Russian Federation, but at the end of the day, I come back to what I said at the outset. Their priority is to defend themselves from imperialism, not to defend others. So when it comes to what they're going to do in this particular case, Jamal, in the case of a foreign force inside the Gaza Strip, when this so-called peace deal was announced, Vladimir Putin was rather complimentary. He made comments at the Valdai conference congratulating Donald Trump and so forth. Now, in his typical diplomatic fashion, he couched his language in a way that left some wiggle room to the Russian Federation's government about whether or not they would support this deal. Okay, he didn't, he was talking about the need for respecting the Palestinian right of self-determination. The government has consistently stated, the government of Russia, that it wants to see a Palestinian state, and it will not, accede to the permanent subjugation of the Palestinian people. So there's that. But he was rather complimentary. China, on the other hand, when Xi met with Trump recently, and in the lead up to that meeting, didn't say anything complimentary about this so-called peace deal. There was no, attempt to flatter the Donald, no attempt to legitimize this travesty. So if I had to put my money on one of these governments coming to the defense of the Palestinians at the UN Security Council, I'd say it more likely would be China. But at the end of the day, they tend to act together in the UN Security Council. So I think they'll come to some kind of an understanding about this and take a joint position. I don't know where they're going to go with it. I think a lot of it will depend on the composition of this force. Who's going to be in it? And exactly what do the Palestinians say about it? So that's where best I can do.
No, that's fair. Look, I have sympathy for Russia on this. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're in the middle of a war. I strongly suspect that the conflict ultimately is going to boil down to, as you point out, they defend their own sovereignty. And if anything pops off from the standpoint, Russia, China, NATO, etc., then whatever that world is after that is a different world. But in the middle of a war, when they're under sanctions, they're under pressure, and in their mind, most likely, a third world war is brewing, it is very hard to kind of take these, let's say, extravagant positions in order to overly extend yourself, if that makes sense. Whereas China seems to take a different tact. China's thing is, we're a peer, you're going to treat us as a peer. I'm not going to flatter you. I'm not going to pretend that you're something else. I'm dealing with you as an equal, which means I don't have to flatter you. I don't have to pretend that this quote unquote ceasefire is really a ceasefire. I don't know what they're going to do in the UN Security Council. I honestly don't. I guess my thing is the peacekeeping force that's going to be put on the ground when Israel goes to kill 8 Palestinians, is the peacekeeping force going to get involved?
Yeah, well, that depends on who's in it. I think that's a short answer. Just to go back
Really?
to what you said, yeah, but let's just park that for a second. Just to go back to what you said,
Please.
I totally agree with what your sentiments, right? I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the Russian Federation is locked in an existential war with the entirety of NATO.
Yes.
And these people are hell-bent on destroying Russia in any and all ways possible, not just militarily, economically, politically, whatever. So China is better positioned, and China also has a substantially larger economy, a substantially larger population, substantially larger military budget, and so it has it could be more proactive in terms of defending oppressed peoples of the global south in Russia at this time. But the UN Security Council veto doesn't cost these guys anything, Jamal. So I mean, there's no excuse for that. The fact that Russia is at war with NATO, it's not like they're going to get any love from the West by going along with this plan. They're still going to be hated. They're still going to be hunted. So they may as well do the right thing and exercise their veto.
No, agree. I do agree. No, I do agree with you. I didn't mean it in the context of the UN Security Council vote. I just meant it in this kind of, I just meant it in a larger capacity of things.
Now let's go to the question of the composite. Sorry, we parked this question of the composition of the force. I guess I can imagine some countries that would go in there, their military forces, and they would actively defend the Palestinians. So, for example, if by some miracle I'm not allowed to be part of this, I think they'd be in for some trouble. But same thing if they allowed Iran. But obviously, that's not going to happen. The Israelis and the Americans are only going to sign off on countries that will do nothing. That's why this thing should be vetoed, by the way. That's one of the reasons. Number one reason is Palestinians don't want it. Okay, this is their land, and they don't want foreign forces on their land. But the number two reason is anybody who gets approved by Israel and the United States to go in there is going to be a collaborator.
Yes. No, agreed. Can we talk about BRICS for a bit?
Sure.
And I want to talk about it in the capacity of people's view of BRICS. People seem to have a view of BRICS as if it's something similar to the previous Soviet Union. Now, and let me give context. A government that has an ideology associated with it. And you can say all governments do. America's a capitalist country, maximize profit. You have this kind of hegemonic idealism that's associated with the way that the U.S. operates. The Soviet Union, and the way that you put it, had a revolutionary ideology built into it at some level. And it understood that it was in this kind of existential conflict with the West. And so it would arm the global South. It would arm, let's say, give money and resources to Africa. It would do those things because those things were kind of built within the context of the ideology of it. People see BRICS seemingly in a similar way. When they look at BRICS, they think to themselves, oh, we have this secondary edifice, this other device, where you don't have to go in the Western direction. You can go in this other direction for the global South and so forth. And they're expanding, they're getting bigger, they're getting et cetera. And they seem to think of them in very similar terms. And then they're confused when it's like, hey, I don't understand how the BRICS nations aren't getting involved. Hey, I don't understand how the BRICS nations aren't doing X or Y. I think they're getting this wrong. I don't think the BRICS nations is this Soviet Union replacement. I think these are realist governments. And they're doing things that are in their interests and in the interests of the organization itself as the organization grows and expands. Give me a take on this, because I've noticed when people do videos, their hopes are built into it heavily, as opposed to just, well, what are they doing, as opposed to what do you hope they're going to do? Or do you think I'm wrong on this in a way I'm looking at the way people's analysis of BRICS versus what BRICS actually is?
I think you just look at the composition of BRICS. It tells you all you need to know. I mean, there are countries in there that are egregious human rights violators and are aspiring regional hegemons like, Saudi Arabia and the UAE and so forth. If they're not full members, they're on the way to becoming that. They're being embraced by the core BRICS countries. So there's this vast disparity in political systems, in orientation towards capitalism, towards the question of religion and state. So that club is open to anybody who basically is willing to respect the sovereignty of the other members, right? Yeah. That's it. I mean, this is really a marriage of convenience. There is a lot of mutual trade going on, increasingly so. joint efforts to protect each other from dollar hegemony. But this is not in any way, shape, or form a replacement for the Soviet Union. I think that that's crystal clear. They ain't going to be exporting any particular vision of how a society should be formed, because they themselves aren't in agreement on that. You know, look at the diversity of political and economic systems within the BRICS. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to the BRICS if and when the West is finally defeated and, you know, accepts that it is no longer the global hegemon. Will it stay together? Will rivalry within the BRICS, for example, between Russia and China or China and India, will it increase it? That may well happen. I hope not. We'll have to see. But at this stage, I think it would be naive for anybody to expect the BRICS to take a position of moral leadership in the world. That's not something we're going to get out of the BRICS anytime soon.
But isn't that a positive on some level? Like the fact that you do have so many different political systems and ideologies. Some of these places are religious, some are less so. And it's this kind of respect of sovereignty that's built into the way that the country, where they're operating. And I get it, respect for their sovereignty. Like you said, they're not necessarily going to take a moral position on political affairs that are taking place on the globe, on the global stage. But they've made the strident argument of, look, we're not getting involved in other people's political affairs. And so if you come to be part of us, you will be a sovereign nation. We are not going to intrude upon your sovereignty. Doesn't that make a statement in and of itself, though?
Within limits, it's an entirely reasonable and defensible position. But the problem is that there are, you know, sovereign states can limit their own sovereignty by consensually entering into treaties which impose limitations on their sovereignty. And the prime example of this right now at this particular moment is the Genocide Convention. They have all signed on to the Genocide Convention. And under Article 1, I've been saying this till I'm blue in the face, Jamal, under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, they have an obligation to prevent and punish genocide. And the BRICS countries, with the exception of probably South Africa, okay, to be fair, because they brought the case to the ICJ, but they're selling coal to Israel. There's nobody in the BRICS that is complying fully with Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. Nobody put a gun to their head and said, you have to sign the Genocide Convention. As sovereign states, they agreed to do that. So they have an obligation to comply with the undertakings that they made. And they're not. They're all flouting them to varying degrees. So sovereignty is not absolute. And I want to go back to something, especially when people, you know, who lead these states agree consensually as part of a mutual compromise to place brakes on their own sovereignty. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier about there being no such thing as international law.
Yeah.
Okay. You could say the same thing about domestic law, Jamal. I mean, you know, the law is only as good as it is enforced. You know, the United States has been run by a goddamn war criminal, one after another, surrounded by war criminals for my entire life. And not a single one of them, even though they violated egregiously domestic laws of the United States, not a single one of them is held to account. Donald Trump right now is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. He's not just doing it in Gaza, he's doing it in the Caribbean. Flagrant violations of domestic law. So you could say the same thing about domestic law. At the end of the day, you know, we shouldn't give up on international law just because it's so poorly enforced. We should demand its enforcement, just as we should demand that our domestic laws be enforced against the powerful. If we give up on that, we're just going to descend in outright barbarism.
Well, I think we are in barbarism. I mean, from my point of view, that's where we are. The president of the United States is murdering random people in the Caribbean. Nobody in the globe is saying, hey, that's outrageous. That's illegal. How are you just randomly murdering people? Meaning even by our domestic laws, that is outrageous, even though we give the president a large amount of latitude in order to effectively kill people around the globe. You would think internationally, under international law, they would say, that's illegal. Nobody says it. Nobody does anything about it. They allow it to happen. The reason why I said there's no international law is because there's no Leviathan. There is nothing above, it's not like you have king of the world, or it's not like you have God that gets involved, or alien species that gets involved and says, well, we're going to ensure that laws are followed, and we have a police force to ensure the laws are being followed. The president can be impeached. Donald Trump was impeached twice. The president can be locked up Nixon was nearly put in a cage for Watergate and the stuff that was taking place. Yes, they evaded the law, but the legal process still kicked into play and still was enacted. Donald Trump was nearly put into a cage over fake stuff in and of itself. I'm saying domestically, each individual country has a police force, they have a legal code, and they have a police force to enact that legal code that would affect, meaning you have muscle that will beat you, kill you, or put you in a cage. In an international sense, I don't see that. You just have individual countries, and individual countries make up their own mind in regards to what they do and what they want to do or what they don't want to do. And yeah, I think we are in barbarism. We've just watched a genocide take place for 3 years. We've just watched Trump murder people in the Caribbean, let alone the other wars that were taking place. But even if you say you isolate those wars, I don't see how, short of locking up a random African dictator, I don't see how this stuff comes into play in real terms. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong on this.
Well, I think it's a question of degree. I don't think that there's no enforcement in international affairs and that there's robust enforcement domestically. I think it's a question of degree. Is there more enforcement domestically than in international affairs? Yes, by a substantial margin. But I watched last night this one of George Galloway's wonderful monologues, and he was talking, apparently, I didn't know this, that it's just been revealed that a cop planted a pipe bomb. Somebody was working for the CIA and was caught on January 6th. And George Galloway, you just talked about Watergate. George Galloway said, this is far worse than Watergate. I agree with it. I don't know about the facts. I'm just listening to what George had to say. If that's true, and Kash Patel was sitting on this information for 10 months, knowing that it was a cop and didn't reveal it voluntarily, this was revealed to the public by other means. Does that sound to you like, you know, the domestic laws of the United States are being enforced against the powerful? I could give plenty of examples of this. And there are instances, okay, there is discrimination in the enforcement of international law. They call it the International Caucasian Court for a reason, the ICC, right? As they keep going after people from the global south, particularly from Africa. But there is a level of enforcement. And it's not, I don't think it's correct to say that nobody is saying anything about what Trump is doing in the Caribbean. The Russians and the Chinese have condemned it. I think they're very clear that they regard this as a violation of international law. Volker Turk, senior human rights figure from the United Nations, has openly condemned it, said it's criminal. Many nations in Latin America are fuming about this and openly condemning the Trump administration for it. Now, is that going to ultimately deter Trump? Maybe not, but it's something. They are invoking international law and they are condemning it. So I look at it as a spectrum, and domestic laws are generally enforced to a greater degree than international laws. But when it comes to how bad things are, it could get a lot worse than this, Jamal. You say we're in the law of the jungle. It could get a lot worse. I think for the time being, international law does influence the behavior of states to some degree. Mm-hmm. It's nowhere near enough. But if we throw up our hands and say, to hell with international law, it's meaningless drivel, I think things could get considerably worse.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough.
By the way, this is a sentiment. I just want to say I get this from my audience all the time on Reason.
Do you? When you bring up international law, yeah. It's like, yes, things can get worse, but how? Like, what? Meaning, what would be different? Like, for right now, you had Obama, who had kill lists, who would just murder random people in these various countries. You have the United States to go into Syria and help overthrow the government of Syria. You have Trump murdering Caribbean fishermen. You had previous presidents to go into Iraq and then effectively lie to the population about it in order to murder 1 million Iraqis, or at the very least get 1 million Iraqis killed, not to mention paying for terrorists to try to overthrow various countries. Okay, all of this stuff is like clear, like meaning anybody who cared to look could see it. It's not even hidden at this point. It's not like the president, or it's not like the United States hides the fact of their behavior in these cases. How could it get worse?
You could see a lot more war, a lot more torture, a lot more invasion of the sovereign territory of countries, a lot more disregard for international maritime law, the laws of the sea. You could see a hell of a lot more than that. It's pretty bad now. I agree, but you know, it could get a lot worse. I mean,
see,
the whole
from my
world
point of view,
chaos. I mean, you know, we don't have outright chaos globally at this time. There's still a certain
don't we?
degree of order. No, no,
I
we
mean,
don't. I mean, you can cross borders into a lot of countries, you know, Jamal, and feel reasonably safe going there. But if we descend into full-blown chaos where there is no respect for international law by anybody, and it's just pure law of the jungle, you can forget about leaving the borders of your own country. You're not going to want to travel internationally.
well,
And
the
so
only reason.
sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
please, no, finish. No, please finish. Please.
I think that the mere fact that we still today have so much international commerce and international mobility is a testimony to the fact that there is some kind of international legal order that still functions to a minimal degree. There hasn't been a complete breakdown. And if there is, we're probably finished as a species.
Okay, yeah, you might be right. You could be right. I get the sense that the reason there's not more maritime violations is because countries have militaries, and they don't necessarily want to trigger a war between, let's say, China, Russia, and the U.S. and NATO countries. Meaning, NATO countries know that if they board a Russian boat, Russia will lose their minds. And same thing with Chinese boats. If the U.S. decided to have a blockade against Venezuela, China and Russia would lose their minds over it. Meaning it's force, that it's a hedge. How much work do you have to do? Would this lead to a larger conflict and a larger war? I agree with you on trade and those type of things. Fair enough. Agreed. Maybe I'm too loose with my words in saying there's no such thing as international law. But one last thing before I let you go. Lebanon. Netanyahu, it has been said, requires war to stay in power. And when the quote-unquote ceasefire took place, it allowed a lot of European leaders to be like, all right, well, this is done. War's over. And then they murdered 100 people. And they still say, hey, war's over. No issue. And now they have moved into Lebanon. Hezbollah, obviously, at some point is going to get involved. There's an expectation that the bombings are going to commence, or at the very least, an open war is going to break loose. This is the conversation for Laith, where Laith was like, he has an expectation that a full-blown war is going to break loose in the Middle East. And it's not going to be limited to Lebanon and Israel, that other forces are going to get involved. Give me your take on that. I mean, like this notion of Iraq troops, resistant groups getting involved, Yemen getting involved, even to the point of Iran getting involved in this. Do you see this kind of regional war in the way that it's being described?
If Israel and the United States governments felt unconstrained by public opinion, yes, I think it's inevitable. And when it comes to Lebanon, Netanyahu has a particular problem. And the particular problem that he has is that he was roundly criticized on a daily basis by people who live in the north of Israel during the war with Hezbollah, because their settlements were getting, the shit kicked out of them. Yeah. One of them, probably the most, certainly two of I actually saw two of them repeatedly when I went to South Lebanon, Kiryat Shimona and Metula. I actually saw an attack on Metula by Hezbollah. I was with Laith in the south of Lebanon at the time, and they attacked it with some thermobaric weaponry. It was quite an attack. In any case, I think
you mean Hezbollah attacked with thermobaric weapons?
Metula is on a hill, and so on the very top of the hill, there's a military base, and then all around it, there's housing. And they didn't attack the civilian infrastructure. I didn't see that. They attacked the military base with thermobaric weapons.
Wow.
And so the people who live in that part of the genocidal entity understand perfectly well that as long as Hezbollah remains armed, and as long as Hezbollah has a presence in South Lebanon, which is to say south of Litani River, they could come under attack at any time, and to a devastating degree. So and Netanyahu has vowed to eliminate that threat. So it's clearly not eliminated. The Lebanese army ain't going to do it. That's now crystal clear. And so the only way for him to make good on his promise of security, and that's his big thing, I give security to the people of Israel, is to send the ground forces in there en masse again. And I think he'll want to do that. And quite apart from the fact that he has to deal with this threat, they want the resources of South Lebanon. They want access to the water of the Litani River.
Mm-hmm.
South Lebanon, if you've been there, it's a very advantageous place to defend because of the terrain. So he wants to deprive any resistance forces of access to that terrain. Now, the problem that he confronts, of course, is that there is a growing distaste for Israel and for its U.S.-backed, Western-backed wars of aggression in the region,
Yes.
in the United States, in Canada, in Western Europe. And I think that the opposition to Israel's aggression in the West is getting to the stage where this is becoming a problem for Netanyahu and Trump, particularly Trump, who's facing midterms next year. And the Republicans just had their asses handed to them in these elections that took place. I think the election of Mamdani, I'm not a big, I watch Laith and you talk about Mamdani, and I'm pretty much coming from the Laith school on this one. Okay.
Right.
I like Mamdani. I'm glad he won. He may turn out to be, an exceptional Democrat, but he's a Democrat, and I don't have a lot of hope that he's going to be transformational. But the fact that he won, saying that Israel's committing genocide and that he was going to order the police to arrest Netanyahu is a big deal. It's a big deal. And I think that's probably, spooked Trump and the people around Trump. And they don't want to lose control of the House and the Senate, in part because Trump's probably going to get impeached if that happens. Right. So there's this bubbling underneath. And this whole thing, I'm just amazed at the things that Candace Owens is saying. I can't believe it. I watch her now religiously just because it blows my mind that somebody on the right, I think she has now the largest podcast in the world.
She's huge. I don't know about the world. Joe Rogan's like insanely ridiculous.
Yeah. So there's a real political issue here about whether or not Trump and other Western governments, Starmer is like, my God, it's a public relations nightmare, the Starmer government in the UK. You can go on and on, the German government, which backs Israel. So did they feel that they have the latitude to continue to indulge Israel's aggressions? I don't know. They may have reached the point where they've had enough. So I think if Israel had its way, the short answer, if Israel had its way, oh yeah, we'd be into all-out war throughout the West Asia, and all of those resistance groups would participate. The question is going to be whether Western elites feel that they have the latitude to indulge Israel again. I don't know.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Basically, the pressure that Western governments were coming under and their association either with defending Netanyahu or at the very least being neutral, quote unquote. I mean, I don't know how you be neutral in a genocide. The very act of neutrality on some level emboldens the genocide. But that this is a political issue. I mean, and it's not just Candace. I mean, Tucker Carlson. What's the other one? Nick Fuentes. Like all of these people on the right, and all of these people have taken serious issue with this idea of make Israel great, as opposed to make America great. No, I agree with you. I mean, some people have even argued that there's a war on the right on this particular issue, where it's splitting the right. I don't know what that looks like electorally, but I agree with you that Trump has a problem in regards to his electoral chances, or at the very least, in the midterms and whatnot. Agreed, 1,000% agreed. So, okay, fair enough. So the other group's going to get involved. Netanyahu, almost on some level, needs a war in order to keep this effectively going. They have initiated, I guess, these areas that they were apparently going to bomb, or apparently they were going to attack. They've initiated a few attacks, but they've been doing attacks for the entirety of the quote unquote ceasefire with Lebanon in and of itself. Elections are coming up next year. Is there a chance? Hezbollah put out a letter where they were calling for the unification of Lebanon, basically unification of Hezbollah and of the military. Up to this point, the Lebanese military has been hard-pressed to fire a bullet in anger. But if indeed they get new leadership in, do you see, or do you ever foresee this organized, this unified front and pushing back against Israel with the political entity itself and Hezbollah, if they get the correct person, well, if they get a certain leader, let's say, in power in Lebanon in the next elections, or that's not so much?
Unlikely, but I don't think you can exclude that possibility. I mean, Israel has basically been bombing the bejesus out of Lebanon every day since that ceasefire came into effect.
Yes.
And, Hezbollah has restrained itself. I don't think there's been a single retaliation. It's remarkable. And the whole time, the Lebanese government has not lifted a finger. This is extremely damaging to the credibility of this government. And people in the country, I think, who aren't necessarily fans of Hezbollah are becoming increasingly irate with the government for doing nothing. And I think this is reflected in the statements of Michel Aoun, right, who said, ordered the Lebanese army to confront the Israeli military. So based on history, one is skeptical, but the situation is becoming rather extreme for the government. And I think the government may have no alternative but to at least put up some level of resistance. Let's be clear, though, they don't have the capacity to do what Hezbollah can do. They don't have the weapons that Hezbollah has. I don't think they have the determination and the combat experience that Hezbollah has. So if there's going to be a defense of Lebanese sovereignty, it's going to be led by Hezbollah and its ally Amal, and not by the Lebanese army.
Dimitri, you're an awesome guest. Thank you for indulging me in my, I guess, bitching about international law.
I understand the skepticism, Jamal. I mean, I totally get it. I know people are very down on international law right now. I just hope people don't give up on it. We need it.
I just don't know how that works. I'm just at a loss for how it works. It's one thing if you had a world government, and if you had so you have this entity over top of other states, but in that case, there is no such thing as hegemon in that context. There is no such thing as these larger states with these massive militaries that can effectively do what they will. How would you ever go after the U.S. in real terms? Meaning George Bush invaded a country, killed millions, or got 1 million people killed, initiated a war that is still being fought now, that is led effectively to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of these groups, many of which we paid, and now to the overthrow of Syria, something that we've been working on for all of these years. And I'm not trying to go back into the argument. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm asking a different question.
Yeah.
How do you ever deal with not even a hegemon, but how would you ever even deal with Russia if Russia went rogue or if China went rogue?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you do it. And so it's like, okay, so how's the international law if there are, let's say at the very least 3 countries that can effectively do what they will? I don't know an answer to.
Military intervention is only one of the tools available to the UN Security Council. It also can impose economic sanctions. So,
that's true.
And one may argue that, these countries are largely immune from sanctions. I don't think that's true. I think that you can inflict pain on any country in the world if there's enough international consensus for the imposition and enforcement of sanctions. But also you could take limited military actions. So I don't want to, cut into your next guest time, but quickly, let's imagine that the UN Security Council somehow overcame, the US veto or didn't have to deal with the veto power of the United States. And they were just confronted with a practical problem of how can we intervene militarily to protect the Palestinians? Well, they could have assembled an armada to go deliver humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza, not to attack US forces or Israeli forces. And they could have said, we don't want to fight. We're just going in there with humanitarian aid, and we're going to set up humanitarian distribution points. If you attack us, we'll defend ourselves, but we aren't going to attack you. Would the United States have attacked an armada, Israel, that included ships from the Russian Federation and from the People's Republic of China and Turkey? I don't know. I think you might have found out that there ain't a lot of willingness on their side to take on a real adversary directly.
Yeah.
It would have been risky. I can't say that it wouldn't have ended up in a war, even a nuclear war, but I think that probably they would not have attacked the armada.
It's the probably part. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, this is the same logic that the Brits and the Europeans use. Yeah, Putin is showing these weapons, the Brezhnevik and the Poseidon and the Sarmat and the Rezhnik and the Kimthals, but he's not going to use them against us. That's their argument, right? We can put troops in Ukraine. He's not going to attack our troops. Yeah, okay. I hear you. I hear you, right? I agree with you, though. I think the U.S. would have been hard-pressed to come up with a justification to bomb a boat from those countries. But God, man, you have lunatics who are in power sometimes. So I don't know. Dimitri, man, I've enjoyed this conversation. I really have. Thank you for
You're
this. Honestly, Dimitri, runs the show Reason to Resist on YouTube. Check him out. When is your next show going to be, by the way, just so the audience would know?
I'm actually late for an interview of Laith Maroof right now, so I've got to. We'll publish that later today. So
I am so sorry. You should have told me. I'm sorry.
Laith will understand. So
okay. Dimitri is a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Definitely check out his show. Dimitri, you are awesome, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamal. Always a pleasure.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. We have come to the end.